My very special guest on the line is Brother Sababu in Plata. We're talking about the Amos Wilson's text, The Psychology of Self-Hatred and Self-Defeat Towards a Reclamation of the African Mind, edited by Brother Sababu in Plata. Brother Sababu, just before we went into the break, Dr. Wilson says that the African lost his guards, and today he's suffering as a result thereof. And he goes on to talk about, in the scriptures, where the Israelite says, before I lose my language, I will cut my tongue out. And he argues that the Israelite recognized that his language, which reflects his culture and identity, is his ultimate salvation. And he argues that you see that the African, who in losing his language, loses his culture and loses himself, he becomes the victim of other people. I want to start there because we have lost more than our language, obviously, because we want to go back to what all that has happened to us. But he says we have lost our guards. We've lost our God. And so that we've lost ourselves.
Well, I mean, it is quite fundamental to how this type of oppression and this dispiriting of the African body and mind is actually created. Mm-hmm. Just to, for instance, in a capsule of the book, the fundamental question was asked: why are negative assignations applied to black and blackness as were expressed in the Oxford English Dictionary of the 16th century? And right there you see even in these books of definition, right, the word black being associated with everything negative. Mm-hmm. Of sin, with Satan, with this, with that, and the other, swartiness and dirt and this and that, and you saw white being aligned with everything positive. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Even being fair, or let's be fair. What does being fair mean? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. As opposed to being black. What's the difference, right? You know what I mean? And then you see white as good here, good this, good that, and all of that type of stuff. So you saw again that type of degrading of even black in and of itself. And of course, I mean, and he would give the example that that a butterfly flying in the house, and we know that type of a thing. And you wonder, you see a black butterfly come in the house. What kind of bad news they're bringing? So black becomes synonymous with, evil, with bad news, with some type of torment and adversity. It was never, you see a butterfly coming and you say, maybe my aunt coming from, over for somebody to see us or something. Mm-hmm. So you saw this whole relating to black itself. Mm-hmm. And of course, now that transference onto black people, onto us as an African people. You see what I mean? And in many cases now, you withdraw from that type of accepting of yourself as an African person, and you want to identify with something else. And you see it manifesting itself 100, 200, 300, 400 years later in what the kind of creeds that folks, I see folks looking pink, and I'm like, what is this? And and you would think that we had gone over these battles some time ago and had, and Black is Beautiful had taken over and this and that, and then you see 20, 30 years later, you see this type of self-hatred re-manifesting itself, re-showing itself. And it's like hell to turn it around, even on the African continent itself. We run into these kinds of problems.
Well, today's Sunday, and I guarantee you, on the African continent and here in Jamaica, the message is, on some pulpit, the Hamitic cursed. And many black people, African people, have bought into this curse. Dr. Wilson has dealt with that in the book also, and we have to keep reiterating, because it is a self-hatred that leads that Dr. Wilson argues. It goes hand in hand with the self-defeat. And it's not that we don't necessarily have the resources or have the power to, in some cases. It's how we're using them is what he's arguing. And we'll talk some more about that as the weeks go by. But let's talk about that idea and how he has dealt with the Hamitic curse.
Well, of course, Dr. Wilson is citing who is Edith Sanders, and how this the idea of this curse, where the Noah, it seemed that after the his salvaging of the two of everything, and the ark, and the ark, people were released from the ark, and they planted that vine that bore grapes, and he drank some wine, and he was literally passed out naked. And of course, his 3 sons were there, but the one who discovered him was the 3rd son. And of course, he called the other brothers, Shem and Japheth, and he covered up their father. And when he came out of his drunken stupor, he decided to curse the child who discovered him in the state of nakedness, drunk. And of course, he cursed Ham's unborn child, Canaan, to be, to serve the other 2. And in later years, these wicked theologians and others turned that relationship in the Old Testament to mean then that Ham's unborn child, meaning even Canaan. So this is the God of the Old Testament, of those people, cursing Ham's unborn child, Canaan, to be a servant of servants you shall be, and this and that and the other. And of course, in later years, you would find the Talmud, the Jews of the Talmud in the 6th century adding on things to it, to the point where it went further that the genital organs of African people would be so-called distended, elongated, and that people of this group will be banded together in hatred of their masters and never to tell the truth. And then, of course, they even said that this group of people shall be called Negroes and all kinds of stuff. And, of course, these self-hating ministers and others. But, of course, some of the white ones would do it before, and black folk following white theology take up this stuff and perpetuate this type of nonsense on our people. So we see this being perpetuated, and of course, once it comes from quote-unquote the good book, right?
And so many people today believe that thing. So many black people, so many African people today believe this stupidness that black people have been cursed by God. Or cursed because now are cursed. And you're making a good point, Jude, in pointing out and underscoring that regardless of everything else, Ham wasn't even cursed. Even if you're going to go down the road with the lies, it wasn't even Ham who was cursed, it was Canaan. But they talk about the Hamitic curse today. They preach it from the pulpit and say they are from the race of Ham, and Ham is a black race and so on. So it becomes all Negroid along the way and African along the way. And it's an interesting situation, because what does that mean for how we see ourselves then? What do we want to become? How do we define ourselves? What do we want to become, if not black, if not African?
No, and you also saw it in other faiths, right? Outside of Christianity, black folk who being Christians, taking this thing up, because remember, it's the mother, it's Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. So you see it representing itself in those 3 faiths.
Yes.
you see, and sometimes esteemed among us, taking up this piece of nonsense and carrying it onwards to no good end. So at some point, we have to come to terms and reckon and throw this nonsense out.
Yes.
That, and it's unusual that a people, as we mentioned 2 weeks ago, you put a representation of a virtuous black God in a black church. You'll be scared to see how many black people don't want to attend that church because what? They are accustomed having Michelangelo's representation of the Holy Family and Mantegna and all of these other people as representing the Holy Family and have no idea as to how these things came about. No idea of the history of the church. No idea of how this idea of Trinity came about or anything. And we just there to be churchy.
Yes.
We there to knock over the benches and to wail and to lift our hands up and this and that and the other, but no critical examination is being done of the development of the quote-unquote church. This
wholesale acceptance. And if you go to the schools, even the children who are studying online now, they have to go to devotion first of all in the mornings. I'm not saying anything is wrong with devotion, but it's the way they are conducting these devotions. They have taken it away from the self. And Dr. Wilson deals with the creation, the making of the self in the book too, and I think we should probably revisit that another time. But it's what they do to the minds of these children and where we stand now as African people, because Dr. Wilson talks about, in order to maintain this status quo, that everything about the African, and that the African has, it's the social construction of itself. Everything that the African has done and everything that the African does has to be denigrated, and the African himself and herself has to continuously being represented and represented in this way for the status quo to be maintained. How then do we get out of this? I know it's something that we're going to talk about much later, but he says that the more things change, the more they remain the same. And he's saying that not much has changed. We need to look at the power dynamics between the European and the African if we really want to talk about change.
Well, one of the things you have to understand is that these societies actually depend upon black folk dropping out. So you see opportunity at around 15, 16, 17, where our children more or less ingest a greater degree of the self-hatred and not performing and other things. It's a time when opportunity is supposed to have opened up for them to go into the realms of the society where they're going to compete for place in the society and over issues of power. And you see that type of a funnel in the reverse, right? Where, all these children that we're educating in these primary schools and secondary schools, etc., you meet that bottleneck up there at the top. And they can't get in. And of course, at that age, there's a rebelliousness and a this and a that, and you find them almost working in reverse towards, placing themselves in competition. In this country here, we had what they call the junior high school system. So, so you would go from, let's say, from maybe 11 to 14. Right? That would be junior high, and then maybe, and then another 3 years. But in many cases, in those early years that we would think, let's say, between Form 1 and Form 3, a whole bunch of subjects were kind of eliminated out of the curriculum, right? And by the time the child goes into high school, these subjects would be reintroduced, but those foundational years where these skills would have been learned, they have been, they have been basically cut out and obfuscated, etc. So now you go into these areas where you go into your Form 4 and your Form 5s, and the orientation isn't there. That sense of purpose as to what is my goal in life, what are my ambitions, and how am I going to tailor myself? That isn't there. I remember talking to one of my teachers back home when they introduced the junior secondary school system, that 2-year or 3-year school, and then you went to another 3 years, so it was 2 and then 3 or 3 and 2 or something like that. And he was saying that he didn't get a chance to follow his students over a 5-year period to see their development. So all of a sudden, they were going to school in this part of the country, and then all of a sudden they go to another part. And so this thing there of having that mentorship from your Form 1 to your Form 2, Form 3, Form 4, Form 5, and they would pull you in and give you a little guidance and counseling and remind you as to what your goals and other things were and whatever. That wasn't there no more. So the children end up being going around willy-nilly.
Yes.
So you see all of these kind of things happening. And it would mean then that you have to restructure your society to solve the problems that your people have. And one of the things that we're not seeing is that these governments, these ministries of education and prime ministerships and everything else, they seem to be bankrupt with ideas, without ideas, bankrupt of ideas to really how we're going to address these problems. And it's just, and it's really hurtful. It's really hurtful to watch.
Yes.
And and by the time, these boys and girls, particularly these young men, are 16, 17, they're already into so much of stuff, right? And you see this type of, there's no expectation placed. And you see this developing even in the earlier years, when these people would say all kinds of silliness, that as if the brain of the Negro closes down by age 18, and their brain, that they have a particularly thick skull that was meant for just work and this and that and the other.
Brother Sababo, as you say that, look at Hegel, for example, or Hegel, or whatever you want to call him. He's somebody who's revered in the corridors of academia throughout the Caribbean, without, not in all cases, but in majority of the cases, seriously looking at the philosophies of this and the thinking of this person, who was one of those first to identify, or according to him, to say that Africans were less than because of the brain, etc., and had no religion and no philosophy and no community, and at the end of the day, nothing. And weren't even worthy of mention in classification or determination of races. So it's interesting that we're talking about the self defeat in a space where we are also the architects in a lot of the cases, and Dr. Wilson is careful to underscore that throughout the book, that we are not without some responsibility in where we are, because it can't be all about blame. At some point, we're going to have to stop and look again. He talks about. He says, I often try to get across the idea that no matter how much things appear to have changed, they remain the same. We must not be deceived by superficial changes. This is on page 28. We must not be deceived by superficial changes, for they are often deliberately created as a way of maintaining fundamental sameness. He says, we must look at the real power relations between Europeans and Africans. That is a key. We must question whether those power relations have changed at all in recent times. And then, and I see you've put this in italics, to say you are not now in slavery does not mean we have achieved freedom.
Exactly. And this is the type of thing there that as we talked earlier, in these independence movements, that we really think that, in a sense, independence is the beginning of your problems. It's not the end of your problem, right? You now have to undo, and you have to restate what the purpose of your country is, and develop curricular institutions and all different things now to bring your people into this so-called freedom, right? And independence, whether it's the 31st of August or the 6th of August, like in the case of Jamaica, right? I mean, that's just a line of demarcation, but now you got to pull it off.
Mm-hmm.
And what we see in many cases, we see some progress within the first 10 years, and then you see major regression.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the first time I came to Jamaica, the dollar was 35 to 1, and it shocked the hell out of me, right? Right? And now I look at the thing there, and now could you imagine at around the year 2000 when I had finished Blueprint or the book on Garvey, African-Centered Consciousness, when I came to Jamaica, and it was 35 to 1, that this would be looked at as the good old days.
Yes.
35 to 1. And I was totally shocked. But then growing up on the other side, I remember when it was almost 1 to 1 or 2 to 1.
Yes, yes.
Right? And within a very short period, you start to see this floating dollar and the this and the that and the other, and you sit there and say, but wait, how come this economics has changed? We now, to buy that same tractor that used to cost X amount, you got to pay 10 times the price, and you would hear Michael Manley there as a prime minister speaking on like it is, and he was dealing with these kind of problems that he would be facing there at the time, right? So you see major shifts.
Yeah.
These problems are systemic problems.
So
and
we have to call ourselves to order at the end of the day, There's a whole lot for us to deal with, and reparations is on the table. That is a very serious issue in terms of moving forward. But in the meantime, while we do that, because we can ride and whistle, in the meantime, while we're doing that, we must call ourselves to order, because there are things that we can do here. We can make history compulsory. We can make history mandatory in schools. Professor Shepherd has been fighting for this with everything she's got. I mean, I must congratulate her on that and give her, all of our support as best as we can. But there are few voices being raised towards this end, because it's as if we really don't care. We have not stepped back to ask ourselves, why are we as a race? Why are we as a nation of people in the position that we're in? Why is it that wherever we are, in whichever country we are, black people, the blacker your skin, the darker your tone, the more melanin you've got, the lower on the totem pole you'll be as a group. And while one or two might escape, and begin to act like the others, in most cases, that the majority of African people remain at the bottom rung of the ladder with the boot of capitalism and oppression on their necks, and by their very own too, in the very countries that they're living. Landlessness is a problem that black people have wherever we are. In Jamaica, we have the private sector, people in the private sector, and just a handful of people owning large swathes of land. And black people are fighting over, the dregs, just fighting over the little bits and pieces and they are called squatters. They're called squatters. Sorry for mixing my metaphors of land and dregs, but yeah. So this is the situation that we have, and we embrace those terms. Nobody has a problem with it. Well, not many people have a problem with squatting or with squatters. People being called squatters in their own country. We see where Biden now is looking at the word alien and is changing it to what's it, immigrant without visa or something like that. What is changing it? Language matters. Well,
one of the things that you're actually seeing here is this: that these nations were really designed to be stillborn children.
Yes.
Yes, they didn't really expect, and even many of the Black Studies programs and other things, right? These were appeasements, these were accommodations, right? So you expand it out. You see that these independence, what we call independence movements, and then an independence with a flag and this and that and the other, right? The same people basically stayed at the top for a significant amount of years. And the other thing, too, is that we had some people who now copy the footsteps of those who went before, and they impose some of the same situations. And, and a few make it through, but for the mass, but they are there to hold the rest of us in place and not really design a free people. And, and at the core of this issue, you have to deal with the history and the psycho-history of your people. And if you're not going to deal with that, you're going to end up spinning top in mud. And that negation of the African presence in terms of skin and contribution and everything else, when you see that you have contributed and built something, do you know what a sense of gratification you do get? Right? And you take professions that, my father was this, so I'm going to follow in his footsteps, I'm going to follow in my mother's footsteps, and this and that and the other. You know what I mean? It builds that step it builds that aspiration. But when you see what has happened here, right, where, our people are forced into living willy-nilly, it just doesn't do anything. I mean, I've been there and I see the beautiful highway, and as you turn off the highway onto the so-called country road, right? I mean, you see the potholes almost the way to the road.
That's everywhere.
And, you know what I mean? Yes. And you need to tell me that same plant that is getting the hot asphalt, that you can't even get one truckload just to put in some of the potholes. I mean, no cutting at the side of the road. Nothing is done. Nothing for the people. And the taxes are going up, right? The house taxes. And, there's that soft underbelly.
Taxation without representation.
Right? They suck them dry every time. All of a sudden, your land tax is going to go up another 100%, 200%. And then there's a late fee attached to it. Everybody got to run downtown and pay the little money.
And we're going to dip in the NHT in the meantime. Brother Sababu, I want to wrap here because we have session 2 coming up next time, looking at the Eurocentric creation of the African personality and African mental pathology. And I like where that goes because it's looking at white animalizing of the African body, mind, and sexuality, lessons of blackness, integration and disintegration, complacency and scapegoatism. What we could go through: uncertainty as feeder of religion, cults and mythology, conditioning, etc., etc., nakedness and judgmentalism, why conditioning, why power, and so on. That's session 2 that's coming up next time. Once again, just to underscore that this is a text that we must all read. Dr. Wilson has done a brilliant job in really documenting our problems and some of the solutions to those problems. But he's getting to the core of why we are where we are, I say without a spare. Thank you so much, Brother Sababu. I'll give you a quick minute to wrap.
Right. I just would like to add that I was able to get some of the copies of Self-Hatred and Self-Defeat. I was able to get some down. Someone was traveling, so I was able to get some down into the hands of Sister Aisha, so she would have copies for those who are interested in reading the text. And this way, at some point, we may even have a question and answer period where we can get some feedback for those who have had a chance to look at it and to form a bond with the book and ultimately to understand these problems, I would reiterate, you have to really sit down with the text.
Mm-hmm.
And you got to grind it through.
I agree.
See?
Yes.
And that's where the transformation starts coming about.
Yeah.
Right? Looking at lectures, they have their place. But one of the things is getting that direct one-on-one association with the text and grinding it through. I think it has that transformative energy.
It does.
That it will bring to the reader.
I endorse that. Thank you so much, Brother Sababu in Plata. Thank you so much, my brother.
Okay, the pleasure is mine. All
right. Okay. Well, good.
Okay.
All right. Brother Sababu there. And once again, get the book. Dr. Wilson says he has nothing against the Bible or the church, except the fact that it has not nearly reached its potential for the transformation and the movement of black people. He says certainly it participated in the civil rights movement. Certainly it brought black people back into the church. He said, I sat in the church many days before we went out on marches. But that does not mean that the church has completed its role at all. The church still has to assume greater responsibilities as part of its growth and development. The church ultimately must relate to black people because God made us black, and he didn't intend for us to reject our blackness. If he made us that way, then it's part of us, and we have to look at it as such. And he quotes from Henry McNeil Turner, who asserted at the Columbian Exposition of 1883 that Adam was black and God is a Negro. A quick break, we'll be right back. Just to back up a bit and to recap also the conversation we just had with Brother Sababu about Amos Wilson's work, The Psychology of Self-Hatred and Self-Defeat. Want to underscore that Dr. Wilson makes it very clear that self-hatred and self-defeat among African peoples are induced. He says we don't just hate ourselves by accident. That hatred is deliberately induced. He says it's induced because it serves a political, a social, and an economic purpose. But he argues that self-hatred cannot come about merely because of what white people say about us, or the white attitude, or white supremacy, or white attitudes towards us. It is related to power. And that is what he's underscoring. This is related to power. It must be backed up by the ability to punish, which we see even in our trade deals, and the ability to reward, which we are seeing now. We see how Jamaica is licking the boots of the United States and Israel. And therefore, what is said, when it is combined with power, then becomes a vehicle through which self-hatred is induced. We saw that also with the young child who was kicked out of school because she was wearing her hair naturally locked, backed up by punishment. So the power to punish and the power of the court, which is white supremacy manifested, is finally what did it, isn't it? So that this is what Amos Wilson is arguing, that it's the power. It's a power, not just what they say, but it's a power that comes with it. So we're going to be looking next time about on how the African personality is created, how the character is created, so that our character can be used for exploitation, can be misused, and can be abused. One of the things that Amos Wilson points out in the book also is looking at how the system of white supremacy and this power system that he's talking about, how it makes positive and desirable characteristics unattainable. And in that way, creating an inferiority complex, self-negation through social comparison. So at the end of the day, the question we asked at the beginning of the program, how do you define yourself, becomes relevant again. So some of these characteristics, and when we compare ourselves to white people, we find that some of what we're reaching for and reaching at is only attainable by white people. And so self-hatred is further induced. Especially by those people who really can't make themselves white. Because that is the plan, to make yourself white. At the end of the day, what are you trying to do? Just look at it. What are you really trying to do? And then the things that would get rid of self-hatred, they are literally out of your reach. So induced self-hatred in those people who cannot make themselves white. So this is basically just some of what we're going to be talking about next week.